911 operators, what's the dumbest call you've ever received? Story 1, I could write a book about the dumb calls I've received. I won't count the ones from mentally ill folks. Those are just too easy. So there's the guy who called to argue that his crystal meth was legal because he made it with store-bought products using his own hard-earned money. Then there's the entitled rich brat who demanded an officer drive her back home because she spent all her travel money partying. She felt that since her father was a well-known surgeon and a high taxpayer, she deserved a break and a free ride. I told her no and hung up. A woman once called to ask where she could get a paternity test for herself. I was confused and asked her to clarify if she needed to determine who the father of her child was. I suggested she contact a clinic. No, she said. She wanted to find out if she was the mother of someone who claimed she gave birth to them. No mental illness, no hysterical pregnancy. She was just dumb. We had an Amber Alert go out. Guy stabbed the mother of his children and took the kids. A man called to complain that the alert was interrupting his TV and said the father should be left alone because he was doing a good thing by being with his kids. A woman once called to complain that her McDonald's triple thick milkshake wasn't thick. Another time, a woman got so angry about kids playing outside on ATVs and bikes on their own family's property during the middle of the day in summer that she had a stroke. She was ranting and raving and then suddenly started speaking slowly, slurring her words and groaning. It was surreal. She really didn't need to get that angry over something like that. Then there was the woman who called, terrified, whispering into the phone. She said she was locked in a closet with her kids. I thought it was a home invasion and started prepping everything once I had her address. Why was she huddled in her closet, nearly in tears? A mouse. That's right. She saw a mouse in her house, didn't know what to do because her husband was deployed, and wanted an officer to come take care of it. An officer actually went out and did. Your tax dollars at work. Story 2. We have a call that every new trainee in my county listens to during training because it perfectly highlights how oblivious our callers can be. A neighbor entered her friend's house after she didn't answer the door. She found her on the couch, apparently sleeping, and called 911 because she wasn't waking up. She said, she's not moving, not answering me or waking up. It looks like she's been cooking with blueberries. Her hands are all blue. The operator already knew what that meant. She was dead. We dispatched everyone. EMS arrived first and immediately backed out. According to the deputy who arrived shortly after, the woman had a gun in her hand and had shot herself in the head. Blood and tissue had splattered all over the wall behind her. The caller never even noticed. Story 3. I've been at my job for 5 years. My favorite call ever was the second call I made to the house of an elderly couple. Their alarm had gone off about 30 minutes earlier. They didn't know why it was sounding, so I dispatched police. On the second call, the wife answered, gave me all the correct info, and passed the phone to the officer. The alarm was still going off, but there was another weird beeping sound in the background. We walked the couple through shutting off their system, but the beeping continued. The officer got frustrated, and the homeowners were still confused. They asked me to shut down the alarm. I told them our system was off and that the beeping wasn't coming from us. The officer went looking for the source of the sound. He found it. Their alarm clock. I swear I could hear him roll his eyes through the phone. I tried my best not to laugh. He handed the phone back to the couple, who still had no idea what was going on, but told me the officer said everything was okay. Story 4. There was a man in the town I worked in who owned some land right next to his house. He sold it to developers for a hefty sum, and they proceeded to build a house on it. The town has an ordinance requiring construction work to stop by 5 p.m., and the workers always complied. Around 5 o'clock, they would start wrapping up for the day. This guy would call every single day at around 5:03 p.m. to complain about noise violations and demand that police be sent to investigate. The noise? It was literally just them packing up their tools. He also insisted on remaining anonymous, even though everyone in the department knew exactly who he was. We used to mess with him after he'd say, "You don't need to know my name," by replying, "Okay, mister," and he'd immediately start yelling that it wasn't him. Another time, we had a state police helicopter flying over our town and a few neighboring ones, searching for a suspect who had fled on foot into a wooded area. A different guy calls in, demanding to know what the helicopter is doing. I told him I couldn't share that information and that it was police business. He grumbled, said fine, but then told me I needed to contact them and let them know they didn't have his permission to fly over his house. I asked, "Okay, sir, can I have your name, phone number, and address?" He replied, "My name is Mike, and that's all you need to know." Like I was really going to radio the state police helicopter and tell them, "Hey, Mike says you don't have permission to fly over his house." Last one, I swear. A different person calls 911. I answer, thinking it's an emergency. The guy proceeds to tell me there's a turtle in the road. I ask if he can drive around it and where it is. He says, "No, it's on the side of the road. No one's going to hit it." I'm thinking, then why the hell did you call 911, you idiot? I ask where it is, and he gives me the location. I ask if he can still see it. He replies, "No, he's gone now." I ask, "What do you mean he's gone?" He answers, "Well, this was around 2 or 3 hours ago. He's probably off in the woods now." Great. Thanks for completely wasting my time. I ask why he called and what he expected us to do now that the turtle was gone. He says we should send a few units to search the woods for it. I'm confused, so I ask why this turtle is so important. He just says, "It didn't look right." I ask, "What do you mean it didn't look right?" He repeats, "It just didn't look right." He literally couldn't elaborate on why he called 911 over a turtle. Story 5. I'm not a 911 operator, but I am a paramedic. Make no mistake, people abuse 911. Anyone who works in EMS has an endless sea of dumb calls they could tell you about. Here's one of my recent favorites. We got dispatched to help a homeless guy we had already taken in earlier that shift. When we arrived, he was standing there with his bags packed, smoking a cigarette. This time, he claimed he had chest pain. A 12-lead and focused exam showed absolutely nothing, just subjective complaints that kept changing. At some point, you learn how to spot the fakers. We brought him back to the ER anyway. Turns out he had left his hat there earlier and wanted a free ride back to retrieve it. So he faked a heart attack, called 911, and then signed out AMA after getting his hat. He was literally whistling as he walked out through the lobby. Meanwhile, during that run, a call came in for a kid having an allergic reaction. We missed that call. We would have been the responding unit if that guy hadn't needed a ride for his hat. Here are a few more highlights. There's a story online about a woman who called 911 because McDonald's messed up her order. Doesn't surprise me. We had a call from someone claiming their oxygen levels were too high. It was a COPD patient on home oxygen, 2L nasal cannula, and her pulse ox read 94%. No breathing issues. High O2 can be a concern due to free radicals and such, so I told her to remove the oxygen. Problem solved quickly. We still transported her because we can't do a blood gas in the truck. We got called out for an elderly gentleman whose glucose was 85. Normal is 80 to 120 milligrams per deciliter. He was certain he was dying. One time we were called out for toe pain at 3 a.m. on a Saturday. I should note, as providers, we treat everyone respectfully and without bias, no matter how dumb the call may be. On the inside, we might be screaming, but on the outside, we keep it professional. Story 6. About 2 months after the Columbine shootings, I was hanging out after school by the JROTC building at my high school. JROTC stands for Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps, essentially a pre-military program for U.S. high schools. The JROTC had a drill team, think YouTube videos for reference, and their rifles were dummy, weighted, realistic-looking props that couldn't fire and could only be used like a club. The drill team was practicing after school, and after one guy missed the catch when he threw his rifle into the air, it came down and knocked him unconscious, leaving a gash on his head. Spoiler, it looked nasty but wasn't life-threatening. The teacher, a former Navy officer, immediately started first aid and told a student to call 911. Cell phones weren't as common back then, so the student ran inside the building to use the phone. Now here's the dumb part. The student, panicking, told the 911 operator that his friend had A, been hit by a rifle, B, was at a high school, and C, was bleeding out. SWAT showed up in about 7 minutes and saw a bunch of kids holding what appeared to be rifles. Yeah, it was a total clusterfuck. One ambulance, out of about 10 cents, not sure what this part meant, maybe 10 cent, arrived eventually after SWAT gave the all clear. The kid who got hit by the rifle was okay, but needed around 10 stitches and ended up with the new nickname Snipe. Story 7, I've been a dispatcher for about 7 years now in a medium-sized county in Florida. Every year on July 4th and New Year's, we get calls about gunshots. Every single time, the caller is perfectly convinced they're hearing gunshots and that it couldn't possibly be fireworks. They'll claim they hear automatic weapons or, my personal favorite, rapid-fire shotguns. And every single time, a deputy goes out to investigate, and it turns out to be the unlikely culprit, fireworks. I once had a woman call 911 to tell me she found a cell phone on the ground. That's it. An irate elderly man called 911 while standing in the sheriff's office lobby to report that the clerk wasn't being helpful. When I told him that's not something you call 911 for, he went apeshit, even going so far as to threaten to break into the office and shoot me. He was subsequently arrested. Another time, a man who had been arrested for domestic battery called 911 from the back seat of the patrol car to say he was being unlawfully imprisoned. I told him the only thing I could do for him was send more deputies. He said, "No thanks," and hung up. He then proceeded to call 3 more times looking for a different answer. We told the deputies on scene. They took his phone away and added a charge of misuse of 911. We had a woman call in stating she accidentally took too much melatonin. She started getting hysterical when she felt the effects of the overdose. She was getting sleepy. Story 8. My favorite was one taken by a coworker. She had a guy call in to report hearing gunshots. He was the kind of pompous ass who insisted he could tell her the caliber of the gun just by the sound. While officers were checking the area, he called back. What he was absolutely convinced was a certain caliber gunshot turned out to be a can of Coke exploding in his freezer. My most recent call was from a lady today who kept calling because she wanted to complain about her husband having their children. They're going through a divorce but are still legally married. In our state, that means they have equal custody rights. She kept insisting that he wasn't a U.S. citizen and didn't like it when I told her that didn't matter. She actually asked me to send someone to deport him. I politely declined. Story 9. Not from my center, but during training, they played us a real recording. This guy's father went into cardiac arrest and collapsed. The caller decided it would be a good idea to say his dad had been shot, thinking EMS would respond faster to a gunshot victim. The fire EMS station was literally a quarter mile down the road, but they had to stage because they believed a weapon was involved. It took at least 10 minutes to secure the scene. By that time, the man was already dead. During any CPR call, everything rolls with lights and sirens. We even send fire engines. All fire vehicles here have paramedics and AEDs on them. The caller was charged with murder. If he hadn't lied about the gunshot, his dad would probably still be alive. Despite all that, I kind of feel bad for him. He was just doing what he thought would get help the fastest. At my 911 center, we have a guy who regularly calls asking for a ride to the store to buy beer and cigarettes. When we tell him we can't do that, he says, "Oh, do you want me to drive drunk then?" He's the only caller I've ever actually gotten mad at, though not while I was on the phone. He does it fairly often. Also interesting are the callers who underestimate their situation. Oh, it's no emergency, but my husband's unconscious and bleeding pretty bad. Also, we won't send an ambulance for your dog. You'd be amazed how many people call 911 because their pets are injured. I love animals, but there are 24-hour vets. Go to one of those instead. That said, I don't want to scare anyone off from calling. If you're in doubt, just call us. You won't get in trouble unless you blatantly abuse the system, like prank calls or false reports. Car broken down and blocking traffic? You can absolutely call us. We can dispatch a tow truck or get a traffic unit out there. Story 10. Going to let you in on a secret. Most 911 calls are pretty dumb and not actual emergencies. I work the overnight shift, so most of the time the calls we get are pretty legit, but occasionally I've had people call in with bizarre stuff. One guy called because he was looking at a weather radar and claimed that law enforcement, no AI, and the CIA were covering up a storm that was going to destroy the city. There was no storm, no rain, no wind. It was clear outside, had been for weeks, and remained that way for weeks afterward. Another woman called because she said someone broke into her home and was currently sitting on her couch looking at his phone. She said a noise woke her up, and she saw the light from the phone when she opened her bedroom door. I asked the usual questions, including if she had a dog and whether it was reacting to the noise. She said the dog was asleep in the bed and usually barks at strange sounds, a huge clue that nothing was actually happening. Most dogs will alert to strange noises at night. An officer went to the scene and didn't find anything. Turns out the light she saw came from one of those electronic picture frames she owned and was well aware of. Another break-in call. A woman calls around 2:30 in the morning saying she heard someone knocking on her door and heard noises outside. I sent 2 or 3 officers her way. During the call, I found out she was hiding in the closet. I asked when she last heard or saw anything strange. She got very quiet and said the last thing she heard was around 11 p.m. Turns out she had been working up the nerve to call 911, sitting in the closet for 3.5 hours. These are just a few of the more memorable ones I've had recently. Story 11. A woman once called me claiming that her boyfriend and his son had been kidnapped by a rival gang. She said she had followed them from New York along the New Jersey Turnpike, but lost them. This was already messy since it crossed state lines, but I started gathering information to put out a BOLO. I asked for their names. She gave me nicknames at first. I told her I needed their real names. She thinks she knows her boyfriend's real name, but has no idea what his son's name is. Weird, but not critical, since I wasn't taking an official report, just info for a BOLO. I asked what the suspects were wearing and if they had any weapons. She said they were disguised as police officers and had guns. I asked what kind of car they were driving. She said a police car. That's when the alarm bells went off. Ma'am, are you sure it was a police car? Are you sure they weren't being arrested? Then she started speaking in code. The orange line crosses at midnight. Ma'am, what are you saying? I don't know what that means. Is this the police? You know what that means? I just told her, okay, ma'am, just go home. We'll update you later. I entered the information, hoping I'd get a warrant hit or something, but nothing ever came of it. She never called back either. Pretty sure she was just on something, because you'd have to be way out of it to watch someone get arrested and think they were being kidnapped. Story 12, I worked in a hospital dispatch center for a few years. All 911 calls made from hospital phones were routed through us first to see if they could be handled internally or needed external help. One morning, I had just gotten to work and was dead tired. A 911 call came in. I answered. A woman was calling to report a missing person, her boyfriend. I could instantly tell this woman was about as bright as a solar-powered flashlight on Pluto, but we had to take every call seriously. She told me her homeless and suicidal boyfriend had just walked out of the hospital 20 minutes ago, and she feared he was finally going to act on his threats. I got a description and transferred the call to police dispatch. I stayed on the line because it was starting to get interesting. She told the 911 operator about her boyfriend. When asked how he might try to commit suicide, she guessed, "I'm thinking he'll probably run into traffic or rent a hotel room and drown himself in the tub because he has $28 on him." Then the operator asked if he had said anything recently about killing himself. She said no. Everything had been going well between them, even though they were homeless and she was pregnant with another man's baby. But her boyfriend still wanted to be the father. Then after a long pause, she dropped the most random line I've ever heard. "We are juggalos too." Well, I'm a juggalette, and he's a juggalo. The call was on speaker by then, but I had the mic muted. The entire dispatch center was cracking up. I still have the recording to this day. I wish I could express just how entertaining that call was through text, but it's just not possible. She ended up calling 911 5 more times over the next several hours to check for updates. We finally had to tell her to stop. Her boyfriend turned out to be completely fine. He had taken the bus to his mom's house to shower and swore he had told her where he was going before he left. Just a couple of Looney Tunes. Story 13, I'm not 911, but I dispatch medical and security alarms. Basically, I'm the person you talk to if your security alarm goes off at home or work, or I'm the person who talks to grandma when she's fallen and can't get up. One of the dumbest things I've ever had someone ask me to call the police for was a woman who demanded I get the police to her house because her alarm panel was beeping due to a low battery. This woman set off her panic alarm because she heard a beep. That's not exactly crazy, especially for our elderly customers. However, this woman was neither elderly nor a new customer. Even after reassuring her repeatedly that the barely audible beep she heard was not her burglar alarm siren, and even after she admitted that when the burglar alarm actually goes off, it could wake the dead, she was absolutely hysterical. The woman basically forced me to call her back and listen to her whimper and cry for the 25 minutes it took for the police to get to her house. Then there were an additional 5 minutes I spent begging her to go open the door because the police were outside. When the police cleared the house, they pointed out to the stupid, condescending twat that her alarm panel read low bat. She still refused to accept being wrong. A normal person would admit they were wrong at that point and usually apologize for the trouble, especially to the police, but not her. She just said the person must have gotten scared and run away. When she pressed her panic button again an hour later because her system beeped again, it beeps once an hour for trouble signals. I explained to the 911 dispatcher what was happening, and she said, "Don't worry about her. I'm going to call this lady and get this sorted out right now." I don't know what the dispatcher said to this crazy woman, but it worked. Didn't hear a thing from her for the rest of the night. Story 14. I'm not a dispatcher, but I was the one to make a call. I was in kindergarten when we learned about community helpers and 911 a few days before my story begins. We had a German Shepherd named Susie, who I'm still convinced was my mom's favorite child. Susie was a puppy and loved running up the stairs, darting into my sister's room, and frolicking. My sister despised dogs at the time and would make a huge fuss over Susie being in the house, let alone her precious sanctuary. So Susie is rolling around in my sister's room while my sister angrily storms downstairs to fetch my mom. I had made my way into my sister's room to roll around on the floor with Susie. My mom walks in, steps over my convulsing body, picks up a dejected puppy, and heads toward the stairs. Now, if any of you have ever had puppies, you know that when they're being carried while wanting to play, they'll squirm, jump out of your arms, and continue playing. When Susie began squirming, my mom panicked and tried to hold on to the puppy, but they ended up flipping head over heels and tumbling down the stairs. There was a cacophony of banging, whimpering, and ouch. From the top of the stairs, I saw my mom and the puppy lying lifeless at the bottom. I remembered my teacher's instructions. Remain calm, dial 911, and explain exactly what happened. So that's what I did. My mom fell down the stairs and she hasn't moved. I think she's dead. And I hung up. Since I had saved the day, I went into the kitchen to make myself a hero's meal, a bowl of Lucky Charms. I wasn't allowed to use the kitchen since I had nearly set it on fire before. But that's another story for another day. A few moments later, my mom walked into the kitchen, gingerly, followed by a dazed puppy. I didn't look up from my cereal when I said, "Oh, you're alive." My mom was about to say something when the phone rang. It was the dispatcher, and she was livid. She scolded my mom, saying I shouldn't have made a false claim and that I had wasted everybody's time. Blah, blah, blah. My mom, however, was quite proud of me for being eerily calm during the whole thing. Story 15. Relaying these two stories from my mother, who worked 911 for 20 years. I've posted them in an AskReddit thread before, but here goes. 1. People are racist assholes. A woman called in panicking and upset, wanting an officer to come out to some shopping center where a dentist's office was. My mom asks her what's going on, why she needs help, and the woman suddenly starts to whisper, "I saw a black man walk up to the door of Dr. Such and pull on the door." Well, maybe there's more to it, so mom asks follow-up questions like, "Can you still see the man? If so, what is he doing?" The woman gets standoffish and says, "He tried the door, then walked down the sidewalk. I think he might come back." My mother tries again, asking for more info. Maybe this idiot woman saw something actually incriminating to justify a police response. Nope. Instead, the caller gets pissed at my mother and restates, "I told you he was black." Mom enjoyed harshly reminding her that having dark skin is not fucking illegal. What she believes happened was, a man came up to the dentist's office, didn't notice the hours, tried the door, and when it didn't open, walked off, like a normal person. 2. People are stupid. This one is actually funny. So Friday night comes and Mom gets a call. The man on the other end is ridiculously drunk and asks if she knows the number for Pizza Hut. They're not super busy, so she says she'll give it to him this one time, but tells him never to call 911 for that again. They think all is good and make fun of him for the rest of the night shift. Until next Friday rolls around and drunk McDewey has looked up the non-emergency number and asks, again, for the number to Pizza Hut because he lost it while drunk on Saturday. Her partner gives it to him and warns him not to call again for Pizza Hut because they're not the damn operators. The next Friday rolls around. He calls again. This time, a friendly officer actually goes down to his address to remind him not to call them for Pizza Hut. No word on whether the officer gave him the number again. One extra. The dumbest but real problem Mom was ever called in for was a semi-truck tire rolling down Main Street and endangering traffic. The responders weren't the brightest, and apparently, the officer blue-lighted the tire. They heard the sirens through the radio and asked him if he planned on pulling the tire over. After chasing it to a roundabout, it finally fell over. But the idea of them chasing a truck tire in a police car has made me laugh for 15 years. Story 16. Wait, I've got a couple more, though they're not via 911. Okay, first one's not mine, but it was relayed to me by another LEO dispatcher. A call comes in, 18-year-old female, vaginal bleeding. Long story short, our award-winning all-you-can-eat college cafeteria, we joked that other colleges had the freshman 15, we had the freshman 50, had successfully treated an anorexic student from a fundamentalist family who had no idea what a period was, much less why she was suddenly having one. Very awkward conversation with two male EMTs ensues. At the same LEO dispatch job, which also handled some first responder dispatch, I got a call from a student who'd been playing with her roommate's EpiPen, genius move, and it had gone off and impaled her thumb. She couldn't remove it. When dispatching EMS, I got a cell call from the squad chief demanding to know why it even went out as a medical, and I quote, "Just tell her to pull it out." I replied, "I did." She said it stuck fast. Cue an anguished sigh and a deadpan. "All right, I'll get the pliers. It'll take like 4 minutes and a Band-Aid." 15 minutes later, I answer another cell call from the chief, this time with screaming in the background. And in the same deadpan tone, he says, "Yeah, so I think we're going to need that transport now." Story 17. My friend's mom is a 911 dispatcher and has a lot of great stories. One time, a young man who was obviously drunk, you could hear the party going on in the background, said that he was bleeding from his ass and that he couldn't stop it. He described some more symptoms, and my friend's mom told him that she was 99% sure it was a bad hemorrhoid and recommended a trip to the emergency room. The man then freaked out and yelled angrily, "I can't do that! The ladies at the club are waiting for me." My friend's mom said, "You're not going to the club tonight, sir." But he continued telling her how important it was and that staying home was not an option, given the long line of ladies apparently waiting for him. I hope he got lucky, even though the hemorrhoid was in the way. I live in the same neighborhood as a very, very strict old lady. She lives in a house right beside a parking lot and a turning area at the end of our street. She always complains about cars driving and parking by her house, even though it was obviously her own choice to buy a house right next to a turning area and parking lot. One day she called the police and told them to come and remove the cars because the parked cars were disturbing her. The police then told her that it is actually legal to park in a parking lot, which made her freak out. I may be childish, but I find it really funny to drive slowly around the turning area with my high beams on when I get home at night. Story 18. From here, I could write a book about the dumb calls I've taken. A lady called to complain that her triple thick milkshake from McDonald's wasn't thick enough. A man called to complain that his $5 foot-long sandwich from Subway wasn't actually a foot long and was upset that he was charged tax on top of the $5. He even sang the jingle from the commercials. I hate this man. A 13-year-old boy kept calling for help with some online game because the guy he was playing with on Xbox told him to call 911 if he was having trouble, and we would help him. He believed this. I fear for us as a society. A man called to report adultery. I told him it's not a crime where we live. Him, "Oh, so my ex-wife can just go and date and find any man she wants?" Me, "Yes, sir, she's an adult. She can do whatever she wants." He hung up on me. A man called to complain that a store wouldn't give him back his money because they said it was counterfeit. During the conversation, he admitted that it was, but felt that since it was his, he should get his property back. Because it's theft and deception of innocent people. You know, he's right. That's why we dispatched an officer, who then arrested him for fraud. A man called to complain that a group of black kids were playing basketball too loudly at the park court next to his house. It was summer, around 2 p.m. He was screaming into my ear and demanded that they go and play outside like everyone else. A kid didn't do his homework for several weeks and flunked a test. He was scared to go home and wanted us to arrest his parents because they were going to be mad and make him do chores. My all-time favorite, though, is the man who called to complain about crystal meth being illegal. He felt it shouldn't be because he didn't smuggle it. He made it with his own hard-earned money and store-bought materials for personal use. Story 19. Repo companies in the area report their repos to us, just in case the owner decides to try and report the car stolen. I started my shift that day logging several when one of the owners calls in. We take his info, confirm it matches, and let him know it was reported as repossessed and to contact his finance company. A little while later, he calls 911 again to let us know that he paid it up to date and the address they gave him to pick up the car didn't exist, so he wanted to report it stolen. We again refer him to his finance company. A few hours later, he called 911 again. He checked his onboard GPS signal and saw it listed his car in another city the next state over. So he had driven there and searched the city but didn't find it, so it had to be stolen. We again explain it was reported and to continue speaking with his financial institution. The day carries on, and we eventually get to the end of the shift. As we are wrapping everything up for our shift up before night shift gets in, he calls 911 again. He found the tow yard his car was stored at, but it was closed for the night. He needed us to open it for him so he could claim his car. We explained that it was a private business and the car wasn't stolen, so we can't just bust in and take his car. He will have to claim the car once they are open in the morning. He was so moved by our logic that he decided to try reporting it as stolen again. Story 20. My husband used to dispatch before he was old enough to go to the police academy. We lived in a small town, ranked third most dangerous in our state. Lots and lots of drug use. There was a woman who was honestly crazy. I don't know if she had mental problems before the drugs or if the drugs fried her brain, but she was a regular caller. Some of her calls were bizarre. She once called and said she had been raped. After coaxing some info out of her, she said she knew who did it. It was her stuffed bear. Another time she called to report a break-in because she had fallen asleep with her blanket wrapped around her. But when she woke up, it was bundled at her feet. She once called on a summer night, it routinely got over 115 degrees in the summer, and said she had walked 3 miles from her apartment and needed a ride back because she was barefoot and her feet hurt. He asked her where her shoes were, and she said she was carrying them. She walked 3 miles and didn't think to put them on. Another call wasn't stupid, but still stuck with me. It was a domestic violence call, and when he asked what was going on, the woman yelled, "He threw a piping hot chicken pot pie at me." Something about her attention to detail just struck me as funny in an unfunny situation. Story 21. At around 7 a.m., we got a transfer call from California to our 911 center, stating that a woman and her husband were being assaulted in their home by a stranger. No other information was provided except for the address. There was no prior history at the address either. About half a dozen officers set up a small perimeter around the house to prevent the suspect from running. A highly intoxicated male tried to run out into the backyard and ended up being tased and detained. It sounded pretty standard, for the most part. Turns out the original female victim had tried to video chat her friend in California while having sex with a stranger that she and her husband had brought home from a club the night before. The stranger didn't like this, so he started screaming and freaking out to end the call. To the person in California, it seemed like her friend was being assaulted, which she definitely was not. The husband was in the corner, probably masturbating, and when the officers tried to speak to him to clarify the situation, he was too embarrassed and refused to cooperate. The guy who was tased was evaluated by EMS, and everyone was free to go about their business once there was some clarity on the situation. Story 22. I am a 911 dispatcher in Oregon. I got a call a couple of weeks ago from an elderly man requesting that I send law enforcement to his house to examine a dead deer carcass in his backyard. He told me that he saw a creature at least 9 feet tall with red glowing eyes in his backyard the night before, and he's pretty sure that's what killed the deer. He didn't explicitly say Bigfoot, but it was implied. I gave him the non-emergency number for the sheriff's office to call the next day. I had another call where a woman was screaming and crying so hard that I couldn't understand her address, let alone what the hell was going on. I was on the line with her, sobbing, for at least 5 minutes before she was able to talk through her sobs enough to tell me she was house-sitting for someone and one of their dogs had attacked one of their chickens. She wanted us to send someone to see if the chicken could be saved, even though she wasn't brave enough to approach it to see if it was even dead or not. I seriously thought someone was dead, and I was trying so hard to get a location for her by pinging her cell phone. I was kind of irritated when she finally spilled the beans. Once her declaration was met with silence from me, she stuttered out that she shouldn't have called 911, then hung up. At least I didn't have to tell her. I had an elderly man call me for an ambulance because he was constipated. He wanted me to stay on the line with him until they arrived so he could tell me all the different ways he had tried to make himself go, some of which involved Vaseline and Q-tips. Gag. I could go on all night about dumb calls. Story 23. In my science class, we were learning the signs of someone having a stroke or a heart attack and what you can do. That day I got home, took my usual nap, ate dinner, and watched TV with my mom and older sister. At the time, my mom was on medication for her menopause. She hadn't been at work for 3 weeks because she was constantly exhausted, so she was taking it easy. Around 9 p.m., she got up to get a beer. She was struggling to stand, and walking was hard too. At first, I thought it was because she was drunk. She drinks a lot. But then I got a look at her face and noticed something wasn't quite right. I immediately told her to sit down and asked, "Do you feel any numbness?" She said yes, but it was slurred. My older sister then got up and left the room because she didn't know what to do. To be safe, I called 911, told the operator everything, and he gave me step-by-step instructions to double-check. I asked her to smile. Only half her face went up. I told her to repeat the phrase, "The early bird gets the worm." She slurred it as much as she could. My older sister walked back in at this point and sat beside my mom. I asked, "Can you get your mom to raise her hands above her head?" When my mom tried, her right arm went all the way up, but her left didn't. My older sister thought she could somehow help by physically lifting my mom's left arm up. The ambulance showed up and my mom stayed in the hospital for a few days. She's much better now. Still some numbness in her fingers, and her smile is a little lopsided. But after that ordeal, I realized that I'm the responsible and dependable child, while my older sister is clearly neither. Story 24. A lady called in saying she had a complaint about someone in her house. She was in her bedroom and said she heard something moving. She ran to the closet and called the comm center 9 times, each time hysterical and ranting about hearing voices and noises coming from the other room. I'm sending units out code 2, thinking someone is in the woman's house burglarizing it. And of course, they're getting all amped up, asking this and that about details, and I've got nothing to tell them. Units get to the house, I hold the channel, and they enter. A few minutes later, they clear the house, and I get a call from my buddy on scene explaining what happened. This woman had forgotten her kid was home. He's 8, by the way, and he was running up and down the halls with their dog. He wasn't laughing because he knew it was late, and she didn't even bother to check on him before hiding in the closet. Meanwhile, the deputies are hanging out with the kid and the dog, while another is trying to explain to her what's happening and get her to calm down. Story 25. The thing about my mom is that she started dispatching when she was 18, became a sheriff's deputy at 21, and then became an FBI special agent in her 30s. Unfortunately, she suffered an injury a few years into her FBI career and had to retire due to physical limitations. But there was no way she could just retire, so she went back to dispatching. She now works for a small agency in South Florida, and on weekends it's totally quiet at the station. When I was home from college during the summers, I would keep her company while she worked weekend shifts. One time she got a call from a super irate lady who was slurring so badly it didn't even sound like English. My mom kept asking, "What's the location of your emergency?" The lady kept replying, "I don't know. There's shit everywhere." She was no help at all, and since she was calling from a cell phone, her exact location couldn't be determined. So my mom went to work. She asked a few more questions and, long story short, figured out that the caller was locked inside a storage unit. She dispatched an officer who found out that the woman was a raging alcoholic. Her family had had enough, so they lured her to the storage unit with the promise of booze and then locked her inside. Story 26. I was an EMT, not a dispatcher, and I've posted these before. I've personally responded to a guy with the hiccups. It came through as respiratory distress. Another time, it was a guy at 2 a.m. who had a nightmare. It came through as chest pain. Then there was a lady who called because a glass broke near her foot and she was worried about microscopic glass, even though there wasn't a single mark on her foot because the glass hadn't touched her. The call came through as a laceration. I've also had plenty of drug seekers and way too many drunk people to count. But then I've had the opposite, calls that sounded minor but turned out serious. One guy called about a stubbed toe, but when we got his shoe off, his entire foot was black and necrotic. We later found out he had dementia. Another patient called because he fell into his pool. Turns out he hit the brick edge on the way in and had a compound tib-fib fracture. One woman called because she was nauseous for 2 hours. It turned out she was having a heart attack. And finally, my first full arrest came through the pager as NV Unknown Medical. Story 27. We got a call about a car stuck in the snow down an abandoned dirt road. There was a foot of snow on the ground and drifts several feet deep all over the place. It was still coming down pretty hard. We responded and hiked more than a mile down the road because there was a bridge we couldn't get trucks across, and the tow truck couldn't fit either. We got to the car and found a young Asian couple who spoke very, very little English in a fancy SUV. The car's display was entirely in Chinese. We literally couldn't read any of the dashboard gauges, and there were no typical indicator lights. We started pushing the car, hoping to get it to a point where it could drive on its own. We pushed that damn car for a quarter mile before one of our guys decided he should drive instead of the young woman. We managed to get her out of the driver's seat and him in it. We kept pushing for a few hundred more feet. Finally, our guy looked around and noticed that the emergency brake was on. He released it, and the car drove the rest of the way out on its own. Story 28. A guy went absolutely postal on me because a construction crew was working outdoors at 3 p.m. on a Sunday to make up for lost time after a week of rain. They were building a new apartment building next to his. I told him to complain to his landlord or the construction company, but there was nothing we could do about outside work noise during normal daytime hours. He told me it was a law of reasonableness and that he was going to have my job, etc. He went on for like 7 minutes straight. I had him speak to the supervising officer on shift, who gave him the same answer. The guy gave up after that. Other than that, there are lots of weird animal-related calls, being in a rural area. People seem to think the police handle things like relocating foxes and baby birds. LOL. It's also sad how racist some people are. I once got a call about an African-American construction worker sitting on a piece of equipment in front of a residence. The caller said it was suspicious. I asked if the man worked there. The caller didn't know, but admitted he wasn't taking anything or messing with the equipment, just waiting and dressed like a construction worker. The caller asked if we could have him sit somewhere else because they didn't want him in front of their house. Turned out he was an employee just waiting for his crew. Most recently, someone bought an exotic snake as a pet and left it in a running vehicle while going into a gas station. The snake crawled into the dashboard. The caller wanted an officer to help get it out. I'm sure there are more stories, I just can't think of them right now. Story 29. I work for the power company. A customer called the Power Problems line, which is mainly to report outages or non-emergency issues like a downed line. We also take calls from local PDs and FDs to support them when needed. This call is why I now always clarify up front that we are not an emergency service. The customer reported a power line on fire and sparking. Okay, no problem. I started gathering information. I asked whether the line was still in the air or on the ground. The customer said it was on the ground over a metal fence. A major detail. I warned him to stay away from the fence. He said no problem, it was on the neighbor's fence, and the neighbor had already been shocked. I stopped him right there. I asked what happened to the neighbor. He didn't know. Said he ran back inside to call me. I told him his neighbor could be in serious trouble and he needed to call 911 immediately. He got upset. Why should I call 911? It's your power line. I told him I had all the info I needed and practically begged him to hang up and call 911. Working in a call center, the worst part is I'll never know how that situation ended. All I found later in our system was that our guys got there and took care of the line. No idea what happened to the possibly critically injured person. Our reports just aren't that detailed. Story 30. One of the best calls came on the 911 line. The caller sounded like a really nervous 12-year-old. He said he and his friend found a stray cat, but they both wanted to raise it. He wanted a deputy to come out and help them establish a custody agreement so they could take turns every other week. I told him that wasn't really a 911 matter and hung up. One of the first calls I took after my training period was for a woman who'd apparently overdosed and drowned in her tub. The guy calling was super shady and slipped up a few times. Officers arrived and it turned out all signs pointed to a murder staged to look like an accident. They detained him and processed the scene. Over a year later, he's been free for a while now. The death was ruled as having an unknown cause. Looks like he got away with murder. Just recently, a homeless guy came into our main lobby around 3 a.m. and asked to use the restroom. I told him we didn't have one, but McDonald's down the road did. He disappeared for a bit, then suddenly reappeared and sat in the lobby. Either he had the fastest bowel movement ever, or he decided to hold it. 10 minutes later, jail staff told us they had him on camera defecating in our trash can. Sure enough, he had taken the can out of view, squatted, and left a gift. He was arrested on the spot and released a few hours later. Intake was more difficult than usual. He didn't have anything to wipe with. Story 31. When I was 16, I dated a girl whose mom was uptight, controlling, and angry. Only the mom had keys to the house, but she lost them. She called my girlfriend to complain about having to pay $100 for a locksmith. Since I was agile and young, I offered to help. She agreed, so I climbed the fence, got onto the first-floor roof, popped a screen, and unlocked the door. Once I let her in, she thanked me, then told me to wait because the police were on their way. Why? I asked. She said she had just watched a criminal break into her house and needed to teach him a lesson to keep her family safe. The cops were confused. All three of us agreed I had permission, but she was adamant I needed to be charged. The cops gave me a ride home, which was nice. Immediately after that, she decided her daughter couldn't date a non-Jewish criminal. Funny thing, I am Jewish. She started calling and harassing me, threatening to call the police if I talked back, hung up, or didn't answer. She even got her non-Jewish criminal boyfriend involved. I eventually got a peace order against them. I recorded a call where she berated me while he threatened to come to my house. Unfortunately, the girlfriend didn't like that I got her mom in court, so we broke up. Still, it was interesting. Story 32. A few years ago, a patient came into the pharmacy to fill a narcotic prescription. Let's call her a lady, though she wasn't very ladylike. Our pharmacy had a 10% early rule. If your last script was for 30 days, you could refill 3 days early. We frequently ran out of Norco. Doctors prescribed it like candy. This lady came in with a prescription for Norco. I checked. We were out. Every other pharmacy in town was closed. I told her she could go to a 24-hour store or wait until tomorrow. She proceeded to call the police because we didn't have Norco. I know this because she had them on speakerphone. The dispatcher said this wasn't an emergency and asked to speak to me. I repeated the same options. Wait, go to a 24-hour store or head to the ER. He told her the same thing. She didn't like the response and cussed me out. The police showed up the next day just to laugh with us about it. Story 33. This one still sticks with me. When I was younger, my mom was a paramedic supervisor. Their dispatch desk was run by the dispatcher or whoever was closest to the phone. The 911 operator would transfer calls to the ambulance station, and sometimes I would answer, just to feel important. One day, a man called the business line and said he had the wrong number. I misunderstood and thought he said there'd been an accident, so I handed the phone to my mom. She talked to him for what seemed like hours. Turns out he was trying to call his daughter to say goodbye before taking his own life. I don't know if it was fate or just that my mom was incredible, but as far as I know, that man is still alive. Not quite a 911 call, but close. Story 34. This time, I was the patient. I had a strange virus that made my immune system destroy every platelet in my body. I couldn't clot at all. Everything started bleeding. My doctor sent me to the ER. They gave me a red triage tag and quickly wheeled me into a serious care unit. They wanted to transport me to another hospital, but were worried I might bleed into my airways. They called in paramedics and an air ambulance crew to ride with me. When the crew arrived, they saw me sitting up, laptop open, chatting with my kids. They walked right past me, looking for the gravely ill patient. Eventually, they realized I was the one. Despite the confusion, they were professional and kind. I got a ride down in the fanciest rolling stretcher I've ever seen, with 5 people packed into the ambulance, watching monitors and chatting with me the whole way. It felt like overkill, but I was grateful. EMTs rock. Seriously.